I mean, do you acknowledge that when Democrats black voters vote for Democrats, it's actually because there's a history there. There's a reason that they voted for Democrats in that time period, not because they were just getting welfare money.
Abby, let me be clear. I don't deny that. I think it's also important for the record to be clear that you had the vast majority of Democrats in the Senate were filibustering the 64 Civil Rights Act led by Robert Byrd, who, by the way, was a mentor to Joe Biden when he went into the United States Senate. So if we're going to talk about the history, let's talk about it clearly and completely. Republicans have been the ones who were pushing not just the 64 Civil Rights Act, but the other 4 Civil Rights Acts that occurred before 1964.
Look,
that's the history of the country.
The Democrats,
I'm not denying
there
that.
were Southern Democrats
Abby,
who
can
opposed,
I finish my point?
Again,
all I'm asking is to finish my point.
On the
Abby.
facts here, there were Southern Democrats who opposed these civil rights bills, but
yes,
a majority
correct.
of them voted for it. It was also led by a Democratic president. So you acknowledge that. Southern Democrats were recruited into the Republican Party in the time period after that. So when you talk about this, you just have to acknowledge that there's been a switch happening in the two parties. It's not the same today as it was during Jim Crow. And so when you say that black people voted conservatively, that actually doesn't really tell us anything. It just tells us that they voted for the Republican Party, which is a different thing than it is for today.
Are we also going to acknowledge that how the 64 Civil Rights Act actually got through the U.S. Senate was because of also the leadership of Senator Everett Dirksen, who was the minority Republican leader in the United States Senate at that time.
Absolutely.
You have to acknowledge that. So I think if we're going to talk about this, we have to acknowledge all of the history that went along with it. And I think that's a good thing. We should have that historical conversation.
I wasn't suggesting that congressional Republicans necessarily were the stumbling block for any of this legislation. All I'm saying is that when you ask, why do black people vote for Democrats, you have to acknowledge that that is one of the main reasons.
All right, guys. So if you haven't seen my last video on 50 Cent saying the quiet part out loud in front of Ben Crump, when it comes to black men potentially identifying with Trump and the reason why they identify with Trump, then you should definitely check it out. Because during that video, I covered comments that the Democrats are taking completely out of context. I mean, really, they're just lying about, to be quite honest with you. This is not an out of context thing. This is just a flat out lie. They're lying about what Byron Donalds said during a black voter outreach event in Philadelphia, in which he talked about the importance of the nuclear family. He talked about his own story, a very intimate story involving his father, his parents, and how he feels that it's important for his kids to have a father in their life. And he referenced how during Jim Crow, the black family was more together. Now, this is a statistical fact, okay? According to the Institute for Family Studies, 9% of black children were without a father, living without a father in the 1950s. Now, fast forward to today, only 44% of black children have a father in the home. Now, again, this is important because I think, in my opinion, the destruction of the nuclear family is the reason for the degrading of the black culture, okay? And that has led to higher crime because back then in 1940s, 1950s, crime rate was lower, despite the fact that you had segregation, you had poverty, widespread poverty, you had oppression and all those things that, the woke revolutionaries love to boo-hoo on and cry about, things they never went through. But despite all that, the black family was intact, okay? And his message was an overall positive message. But again, somehow the Democrats have spun it into him saying that black people were better off under Jim Crow, which is not what he said. In fact, you would have to be an idiot to interpret it in that way because he didn't even come close to saying that. But that doesn't stop the mainstream liberal media from carrying the water of Democrats and pushing this hoax on their outlets. And that leads me to this interview right here between Byron Donalds and Abby Phillip. Okay, Abby Phillip, the black woman anchor at CNN, who's going to do her job as a black woman, which is to try to put a black conservative in his place, right? She's going to question Byron Donalds about this, and Byron Donalds is going to school her on what he actually said. So without further ado, let's get into it.
What did you mean by black families were more together during Jim Crow?
Frankly, what that is about the empirical fact that before the Great Society, before Lyndon Johnson's policies, there was more black families united. The marriage rate in Black America was significantly higher before the Great Society. The period of time that coincides with that, obviously, is Jim Crow era. And then after the Great Society, the marriage rate in the black community plummeted significantly. The Great Society is a part of that reason, not completely, but it's definitely a part of that. And what you're seeing right now in America is a reformation of black families in America. That's a good thing, not only for the black community and for black families, but it's also a good thing for the country.
So what was the point of tying together the black family and Jim Crow specifically? I mean, Jim Crow, as you know, was a period of racial segregation, of racial terror. Why would you make that connection?
All I was doing was referring to the time periods when you talk about the historical timelines in America and coinciding with black families and what the marriage rate in black families are. The overarching point is obviously talking about what polling shows today, that about 25% of the black vote, depending on what poll you're looking at, is leaning towards supporting Republicans and supporting President Trump. The corollary to that is that when you're in a family unit, husband and wife, living together, working together, thriving together, you're raising your kids, your thought process is now talking about building generational wealth. What am I leaving to my children? What kind of communities do I want my children to come up in? What are the educational opportunities? What's going on with the economy? How does, and then to a broader level, how does foreign policy and all these other public policy issues flow into that? And so when you compare the terrible agenda of Joe Biden and what that's done to families in America, coinciding with the fact that you are seeing a reformation of black families in America today, which is an absolutely wonderful thing and needs to continue. My view is it also coincides with a more conservative leaning and a more conservative mindset politically in those families.
Yeah, so before she continues her propaganda here, because this is, again, one of the most disingenuous interviews I've ever seen in my life. Okay, I mean, it's a very stupid question. Why do you use the term Jim Crow? Well, because he was referring to a time period. This is really not that hard, right? His whole point was that, hey, after the Great Society, that's when the black family started to break down. Now, what was before the Great Society? For the most part, Jim Crow, right? It's much easier to say, hey, well, during Jim Crow, which would be before the Great Society, okay, than to say, oh, well, during the, I don't know, after slavery. Well, if you say after slavery, they get mad too, right? What are you supposed to say? Between the 1860s and the 1960s, the black family was together more. Would that have been a better way of saying it, Abby? Is that what you wanted? Right? Is that what you wanted? Because I'm pretty sure these people would find a way to spin that too. It doesn't matter what he said. The fact that he brought that up, that Democrat policies are part of the reason for the black family being broken apart. That's what they really don't like. They don't like blaming Democrat policies for what has happened to black people in this country. Okay? They really don't like that. So that's the issue here. But what they try to do is that they try to distract and to dodge actually discussing that or having that discussion by focusing on, well, Jim Crow, you said Jim Crow. You implied that black people were better off doing Jim Crow. Ooh, scary, Jim Crow. That's what's going on here. Okay, this is not a genuine conversation from Abby Phillip at all. Okay? She's going to show you in this interview that she's here to push propaganda. She's not here to have an actual intellectual conversation about what he was talking about. She knows what he was saying, but she don't care because she has an agenda, right? And this agenda, let's be honest, only works on stupid people, right? Let's keep it 100. And they believe that a majority of the people that listen to their show are stupid. Okay, this is the whole, well, Florida is teaching kids that black people benefited from slavery hoax all over again, right? You guys remember that? In Florida, one of their advanced courses in African-American history, they factually stated, yeah, slaves learn skills, and some of these slaves use these skills to help them out after slavery, right? To help themselves, to do for themselves after slavery, which is factually correct. Oh, well, DeSantis is teaching kids that black people benefited from slavery, that slavery was a good thing. Except when you look at the curriculum for the course that these people boohoo, whine, and crying about, it's the exact same curriculum as AP African-American history, which these people are quiet about, right? Silence, crickets on that. They ain't got nothing to say about it when it's taught in AP African-American history, but when it's taught in Florida schools in an advanced course, oh, well, that's a problem. That's racist. You can't teach that to black kids. Again, this is fake. This is fake.
One thing I really want to just get you to address is there were a lot of people who heard what you had to say, and a lot of them are offended.
Well, if you're offended, you're stupid, right? I'm so serious. Like, if you're offended, then I have to question your intelligence, because that means that your listening comprehension skills are just not good, right? There's no way that you can interpret what this man said the way that the liberal media and Democrats are spinning it. So again, if you're offended, then boo-hoo, oh, so what, right? Be offended. But again, you're not a very intelligent person if you're offended by what this man said.
By the idea that you would repeat Jim Crow 3 times in your comments, as if to suggest that that was a time period because that black families were, in your words, together, because, in your words, black people were not just more conservative, they voted more conservatively. That's a good thing. I mean, it sounds like nostalgia. Do you regret using that time frame as a reference?
So again, this is why journalism is a joke, because she's reading into his comments, suggesting that he's saying something or suggesting that he's pushing something that he's not pushing, okay? I mean, it's very simple what he was saying, okay? What he was saying is that the nuclear family is good. There were more nuclear families during this period of time, right? That doesn't mean that black people were overall doing better during this period of time, or they were better off during this period of time, even though, I mean, you could argue, relatively speaking, that despite segregation, despite the oppression, despite Jim Crow, you had the average working man, black man, the wage gap between him and the average white man was closing. It closed almost 60% between 1940 and 1980, with large gap decreases between 1940 and 1960. Now, again, what happened in the 1960s? Oh, yeah, what Byron Donalds was talking about, the Great Society, okay? Now, again, is that to say that black people overall were better off doing Jim Crow? No. But that's to say that that says something about, okay, the power of the nuclear family, in the sense that, you know, before it was broken up, or before the government incentivized the destruction of the nuclear family, hey, black people were making gains. And ever since the 1980s, that gap has remained unchanged. Okay, so we haven't seen the gap close since the 1980s. Again, these are undeniable facts according to PBS. Okay, let me make sure I cite my sources on this, so you guys don't think I'm just making it up. No, I'm not just making it up. As I mentioned before, crime rates were lower. So again, that says something about the nuclear family and the power of the nuclear family to thrive despite the segregation, the oppression, Jim Crow, whatever you want to call it. Relatively speaking, considering the situation that black folks was in, hey, black people were making gains, okay? They were making gains. Now, I know these facts might be offensive to some people, but don't take issue with me. Take issues with the facts, right? This is just what it is. And, you know, again, the Democrat Party, they don't like that, right? They don't like these types of facts, okay? They really don't.
Nobody ever made nostalgia. That was never the point. It wasn't even about that. So where now I'm going to get my backup is I didn't say that. I didn't even insinuate that. That is where the media and, yes, Hakeem Jeffries and a lot of other people are taking
what exactly didn't you
insinuate?
insinuate?
No, back up.
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. What didn't you insinuate?
The premise of your question, I did not insinuate. That is what people are trying to weave into what I said. What I said is crystal clear. It's on my social media. Go to @Byron Donalds on X. You can see the full clip. Abby, I appreciate you playing the full clip. What you are dealing with right now is a political environment where now anything I might say or any major surrogate might say is going to be twisted into the lens of race. That was never the point, not the idea
I just want
whatsoever.
just to clarify my questioning of you.
Sure.
I mean, I understand that this idea that you said it was better. You didn't use the words better. But when you talk about that time period, you're suggesting that because the black family was together, they were better off than they are now.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about, right? Overall, definitely not, okay? But that doesn't mean that there weren't some things that were positive about the fact that, again, during that era, black people were more together as a family unit. Again, that doesn't mean that you're romanticizing about going back to segregation. That's actually what Democrats are doing, right? That's what these race hustlers are hell-bent on doing, going back to segregation, okay? If you want to talk about people romanticizing about segregation and Jim Crow, those are progressives, right? This is what they want, okay? Again, the point is not that segregation in and of itself was better. The point is that it just so happened that the end of segregation aligned with a time period in which you had Democrats pushing policies that incentivize the nuclear family to dissolve. That is the point. But again, it's frustrating because it's a very simple thing to understand. I know that Abby knows this. I know that she understands it. But again, her job is to pretend like she doesn't understand it or that she's trying to understand it, and then to ask these silly questions to try to make it seem like Byron Donalds is saying something that he's not actually really saying. Okay? And this is a big deal because Byron Donalds has been, a good surrogate for Trump. He could be a VP pick, and this is their way of trying to tear down Trump. Going out to Byron Donalds, this is the reason why they're doing it. Democrats are struggling with the black vote, so they're going to attack the guy, Byron Donalds, who's doing black outreach, right? This dude is in Philadelphia. Biden was just in Philadelphia a week ago trying to get black voters, right? So now they're going to try to tear down this guy as not a credible black person, right? As a sellout, as all the racial slurs. You already know what they do, okay? To try to discredit him because, again, they're seeing black people move away from Joe Biden, right? And this is the strongest evidence. The fact that the mainstream media is freaking out over this comment from Byron Donalds tells you everything you need to know about what's actually really happening behind the scenes, what Democrats actually think in regards to what's happening with black voters. It's not good, right? It's not good for them at all.
See, this is the problem, Abby.
So are you saying that that's not the
Abby,
case? That the black family was not better
No,
off
I did
when
not
they
say
were,
that,
in your
Abby.
words, together?
Abby, let me put it to you like this.
In the Jim Crow era.
Let's agree on something. I am, obviously one of the better communicators in the Republican Party. I know how to put words together. I do it very, very often. So I'm not going to say something that I do not agree with. What America is seeing right now, especially Black America, is the gaslighting that unfortunately does happen in politics, where you take my comments and you want to weave your own political viewpoint into what I said. What I said is very clear.
I asked you to explain because I wanted
to
what I want to undo is understand what you're saying here. Because if you're making a comparison, you're saying the black family was together then, they're not together now, and you're using that to try to say that things are bad now. Well, first of all, let me just to set the table here. By pretty much every available measure, black families, black individuals in this country are better off today than they were during Jim Crow. Would you agree with that?
Abby, of course I would. I'm not making that point, and this is the problem. What the Democrats, what Hakeem Jeffries did on the House floor, what Jamie Harrison, what the president of the NAACP, what the Biden campaign, because they're the ones who started this. It was really the Biden campaigns who were trying to cherry pick everything. They're trying to twist my words into saying something. I never said that. What I was talking about was specifically black families. And the point that black families being together is a great thing for the black community. And you do have to acknowledge the empirical fact that before Lyndon Johnson's policies and the welfare state that was created in the United States, I'm not talking about good, bad, or indifferent.
But what about
black families were, black marriage rates were significantly higher.
Well, what about
They're
other
rising
things that
again
might
in
have,
America.
But,
That's a good
but
thing.
What
We should
about other
celebrate
things
that.
that may?
Yeah, so I would add to that in response to Abby's question, because again, she's trying to get him to say something that he really doesn't want to say in order to get a soundbite, right? And because Byron Donalds is a politician, he has to choose his words carefully because they're going to clip him up and they're going to destroy him, right? If he doesn't frame his argument in the right way, okay? This is what she's trying to do to him, okay? But because I'm on YouTube, I'm not a politician, I can go deeper than this and say, well, when you ask the question, when you say, well, black people are better off today than they were during segregation, would you agree with that? Well, again, you have to ask that question in comparison to what? Or in comparison to who, okay? Because yes, black people are doing better overall because the whole country is doing better, right? The economy overall is doing better. But when you look at the fact that crime rates are much higher among black folks today, you also have more black people than back then that are not working, or more specifically, black men that are not working because they're incarcerated or they dropped out of the workforce or they're unemployed. That has increased. And also on top of that, the closing of the wage gap that happened between the 1940s and 1980s, that is essentially increased now back to where it was during the 1950s. And this according to a working paper called Divergent Paths that was done by Patrick Breyer, who's a professor at Duke University, in which, again, you could make the argument that at least by some metrics that, hey, I mean, if you look at the progress that has been made since Jim Crow to today, in some aspects, by some metrics, yeah, I mean, there hasn't been much progress made, or there's been negative progress, right? So you can make that argument when it comes to some things. Now, again, because the country overall is doing better, the economy overall is doing better, yeah, I think most people would agree overall black people are better off than they were in segregation. But again, that's because the economy, the country is doing better overall, right? But if you ask the question of, well, how could black people be doing better today relative to how well they were doing versus whites in the 1940s to the 1970s, 1980s, then you can say, well, if it wasn't for the breaking up of the nuclear family, then black people would be doing a lot better, comparatively speaking, to whites, okay? There would be more progress made. The gap would have closed more. That essentially is the argument, right? But again, that requires nuance, and you can't really get that deep into it in a quick 5 to 6 minute CNN segment. They're not going to let you do that, okay? Because you start spitting those type of facts, they won't ever allow you on the network again, right? That's kind of what happens.
They have contributed to the, maybe the decline in marriage rates, which, by the way, is not unique to black families. That's happening actually across racial groups. But
again, it's affecting black people the most, right? So again, you want to say, well, it's affecting everybody. Yeah, true. You're right. It is. But who is it affecting the most? Okay. Who is it negatively impacting the most? Again, these people love to talk about a disproportionate impact on things, except when it comes to when it doesn't fit the narrative for black folks, right? They love to talk about it when it comes to police brutality. Oh, well, black people are disproportionately affected by police brutality, right? Okay, fine. But then when you talk about food stamps and welfare and government benefits, well, 1/4 of black families on government assistance. And all of a sudden they want to say, whoa, no. But more white people are on food stamps than blacks. So therefore, food stamps benefits white people more than blacks. That's the argument that Joy Reid tried to make, right? That's the argument that she tried to make. But again, it's just so funny how they throw out the whole disproportionate thing or proportionality argument when, again, it doesn't fit the narrative, okay? Like, for example, when it comes to sports as well, too. Oh, well, the NFL doesn't need more diversity. They don't need more white people that play football, right? They never talk about that. They never say that. But they want to diversify everything else that's mostly white. But again, back to my main point here is that the marriage thing is a big deal because we know how to solve poverty, okay? The best solution for poverty is not a government program. It literally is marriage. When you look at the poverty rate among married individuals, it is below 10% for all races. For all races. Below 10%. That is the cure to poverty. And I think that is the overall point that Byron Donalds is making here. But again, this is not the conversation that CNN wants to have. They don't want to have that conversation. They want to talk about everything else except the positive aspect of what he's saying.
What about other things? I mean, what about redlining?
Which was Democrats. This was FDR, okay? They always want to bring up the systemically racist policies, but a vast majority of them are a product of Democrats.
Do you think that had an effect on the black family? What about mass incarceration? What about the war on drugs, which was pushed by a Republican president whose advisor said it was specifically to target black people? What about all of those things? Yeah,
but again, who wrote the drug bill and the crime bill, Abby? Again, it's funny how she frames this in a way in which she completely leaves out Joe Biden in his role, the current Democrat Party president, in all of these so-called systemically racist policies. You guys see how this works? Again, this is the propaganda hit from the CNN that pisses me off, right? It really does.
Look, if you want to talk about redlining and a lot of the other policies that were put forward, quite frankly, by the Democrat Party, if you're going to go back to Jim Crow, because Jim Crow was Democrat policies.
Well,
That's what that was.
I know that
Come on,
you
Abby,
know
don't
this.
cut me off when I'm trying to make a
Congressman,
point.
let me just, I
Abby.
have to correct on a factual point here. I know that you know, that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party of today are ideologically not what they were during Jim Crow. You know that, Congressman. So
Okay, so if that's what you want to go with, Abby, okay, if that's what you want to go with, then stop claiming FDR. Stop claiming FDR. Because they use this silly talking point all the time. Well, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party are not the same as they were. Okay, so why'd you bring up redlining? Where did redlining come from, Abby? Redlining came from FDR, the New Deal. And Democrats, every chance they get, they claim FDR. FDR is us. But he was a Democrat from what, the 1930s, 1940s? So again, it's just funny how that works. They want to claim Democrats from back then when it's convenient for them. But when Republicans talk about, okay, well, what about all these racist policies passed by Democrats back then? Oh, no, you got to understand. The Democrats back then are today's Republicans, right? And today's Democrats are actually yesterday's Republicans. This is what they want to do. Because again, Republicans, whether that be women's voting rights or civil rights, Republicans were largely on board with these initiatives, right? Before Democrats were. So that's why they conveniently want to claim certain Democrats like a FDR, while at the same time, they don't want to claim all the other Democrats that were responsible for the terrible policies. Even though FDR, again, was responsible for redlining in the New Deal.
to suggest that, the Democrats of 1920 are the same ideologically as the Democrats of today is inaccurate. So just, you can continue, but I wanted to...
That's not totally true, Abby. And I think if we want to have that conversation about the policy positions between Republicans and Democrats, we can have that conversation.
Yeah, so you seen that, you heard that, okay? The propaganda is just, it's frustrating to me because I know that Abby Phillip is smarter than that, but she's playing her role as a propagandist, not a journalist, okay? She's trying to read into what he said instead of actually just taking what he said at face value, right? But again, her job is to try to make him seem like he's saying something that he's not saying. And I think that Byron Donalds did a good job of handling that. This is something that Democrats are going to boohoo, whine, and cry about for a few days because, again, they're going to use this to try to smear Trump. They know that Byron Donalds could possibly be in a run-in to be VP. And if he happens to be VP, okay, which could help out with the black vote, they're going to try to tear him down as much as possible. Again, has Abby Phillip ever asked Joe Biden about any of his systemically racist policies that he actually put on the books? Or him claiming that if you don't vote for me, you ain't black? Or that Mitt Romney is going to put you back in chains, right? Has she ever asked Joe Biden or a Democrat about their racist comments? Have they ever asked Kathy Hochul about claiming that black people or black kids don't know what a computer is? They never drag Democrats in the media and ask them about their racist comments the way that they try to do with the GOP. Even though what the GOP says is not racist, this is just facts, right? If you state a fact, apparently that's racism. But if you say that black kids don't know what computers are, then, apparently that's not something that Abby Phillip or CNN, they're not interested in really diving deep into the underlying racism of the Democrat Party. It really is kind of crazy to see the hypocrisy here. Okay, and it's so overt and so in your face, and that's why it's so frustrating. But again, kudos to Byron Donalds for doing this interview and for schooling Abby Phillips on what he actually said. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.